Welcome to the Hidden Corners, where truth and terror collide. Discover a realm where the lines between the living and the supernatural blur, as you embark on a journey to the paranormal and visit the mysterious hidden corners of your mind.
This is Book 4 of the Wolfman Chronicles, Chapter 8, The Chupacabra. And we're still in Mexico and Alaska. This is the legend of the Chupacabra. In the remote, arid regions of Mexico, where the moon casts long shadows over the rugged landscape, the legend of the Chupacabra has been whispered for generations. The name Chupacabra translates to goat sucker, a creature said to prey upon livestock, draining them of their blood and leaving behind mysterious, lifeless bodies. The story begins in a small village nestled at the edge of the dense forests of the Sierra Madre Mountains. According to local lore, many years ago, a series of strange occurrences began to plague the village. Farmers would wake up to find their goats, their chickens, and their sheep all dead, their bodies unmarked except for 2 puncture wounds on their necks. One night, a courageous farmer by the name of Diego, determined to uncover the truth, decided to stay up and watch over his herd. As the full moon rose high in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the landscape, Diego saw a shadow moving swiftly among the trees. Emerging from the darkness was a creature unlike anything he had ever seen. The Chupacabra stood about 4 feet tall with a hunched back and spines running down its back. Its eyes glowed red in the moonlight, and its teeth were sharp and glistening. Diego watched in horror as the creature leapt upon one of his goats, draining its blood with terrifying efficiency. The villagers, upon hearing Diego's tale, were filled with fear and dread. They believed the Chupacabra to be a creature born of dark magic, a harbinger of misfortune and death. Some said it was a cursed being, transformed by a powerful sorcerer as punishment for a grave sin. Others believed it to be an ancient beast, awakened from a long slumber by the disruption of its natural habitat. Despite numerous attempts to capture or to kill the Chupacabra, the creature always eluded its pursuers, vanishing into the night like a phantom. The legend spread far and wide, and soon, sightings of the Chupacabra were reported throughout Mexico and beyond, each tale adding to the creature's terrifying mystique. And to this day, the legend of the Chupacabra endures. In the quiet hours of the night, when the wind howls through the trees, the moon casts eerie shadows, the people of the Sierra Madre still listen for the telltale signs of the goat sucker. They leave offerings of food and say prayers, hoping to appease the creature and protect their livestock from its deadly threat. The Chupacabra remains a symbol of the unknown and the supernatural, a reminder that in the vast, untamed wilderness, there are still mysteries that defy explanation, lurking just beyond the edge of the firelight. Mexico. There was a small fire. I thought you should know Julian was on the phone with Miguel, filling him in on the details and trying hard to make it sound less than it really was. A small fire, Miguel asked. Just how small? What are you not telling me? Julian sighed. Well, you know that pendejo who assaulted Wanita and I the other night? The one she dated for a while? Well, apparently he has it in for us now. He drove over here while we were in town, dropping you off at the airport. He lit a fire on the veranda. Honestly, Miguel, it did not do too much damage. We arrived shortly after it had started, and the sprinkler system had already doused out the flames. The fire department arrived soon after and took care of the remaining embers. Now there's some smoke damage and a few of the outdoor pieces of furniture are charred, but it could have been a lot worse. None of the glass windows are broken, and the tile doesn't appear to have cracked or buckled. Do you know for sure that it was Montoya? Well, Wanita thought she recognized him speeding away from here in a pickup truck. She's certain it was him. I didn't get a look at him. I was glancing the other direction when he sped by, but I did see his truck, and Wanita is sure it was him, Julian replied. Okay, so do you think I need to return right away? Miguel asked him. No, I don't think that's necessary. Go on out and see Catherine and the babies. I can take care of things here, Julian assured him. Well, what about this Montoya? Oh, don't you worry about him. Wanita is planning her revenge. Lord help us all, Miguel laughed. Give those babies a big hug and a kiss from Grandpa, Julian said as he ended the call. Wanita and Rosa were mopping and cleaning the tiles in the entryway in the kitchen. The rest of the house was unharmed except for some water damage from the sprinklers. But the veranda had suffered the most damage. Julian set to work on that, sweeping up ash, removing burnt patio furniture. He fully believed Montoya did not intend on burning down the house, or he would have started fires all throughout the building, and not just on the veranda. He had no idea what Wanita was planning to do, but he was sure it would be far worse than this small fire. It was only 4 in the afternoon, but Montoya had already spent several hours in the dimly lit bar. The amber glow of the tequila in his glass reflected the flickering light of the bulb, the fixture overhead. He noted that it still hadn't been changed in, how many days now? The bar was his sanctuary, a place where he could escape the reality of his failed life. He would sit for hours, days at a time, lost in thought and cursing the fate that had brought Wanita into his life. The anger simmered just below the surface, a constant companion to his self-loathing. He believed he would have been a prominent politician if given half the chance. He had vision, he had ambition, and a promising future. But now those days were long gone. But now he was just another regular at the rundown cantina, drowning his sorrows in cheap tequila and bitter memories. He took a long, slow drink, savoring the burn as it slid down his throat. The alcohol was the only thing that seemed to numb the pain of his shattered dreams of glory and popularity. I could have had it all, he thought bitterly. Oh, he had a beautiful wife, 2 beautiful daughters, a home in town, and one in the country. Cars, money, drugs, anything he wanted, until the night he first laid eyes on Wanita. There was just something about her that he couldn't resist, and it had cost him everything. Now he lived in a cheap 2-room, run-down, hole-in-the-wall dive apartment building on the bad side of town. Of course, he couldn't let his ex-wife know where he was living, or she would never let him see the kids. And every second weekend of the month, Montoya was allowed to have his kids for the entire weekend. He rented a small, expensive house on the edge of a large park just for that one weekend a month. He let his kids and his ex-wife think that this was his home. It took nearly all of his pension just to pay for this one weekend. And on the second Friday of the month, he dressed in his nicest clothing and drove over to the house that used to belong to him, and he picked up his kids. They drove to the rented house. He spent the weekend playing in the park and eating out at restaurants. And that Sunday on 4 p.m., he returned them and drove back to his embarrassingly small and dirty apartment. It was pride that kept him from telling his family the truth. That and the fact that the kids wouldn't be safe in his real neighborhood. So the rest of the month, he scrimped and he saved his money for the 2 things that mattered in his life: his tequila and his daughters. Even that was getting more difficult now that his wife was planning to remarry. Considering the man she had chosen was a policeman, he had no doubt the man had the resources to discover Montoya's true residence. He ordered another tequila. Another afternoon of drowning his misery in the bottom of a glass. The bartender, who knew Montoya's routine all too well, silently refilled his drink. Montoya swirled the amber liquid in his glass, wondering what Wanita had thought when she saw the fire he had started. He had seen them all leave. He'd been driving out there early in the morning for several days in a row, trying to get up the courage to sneak to the barn and start it on fire. But the fear of being caught by Miguel prevented his actions. But then, this very morning, he had seen them all leave. He knew that this was his chance. He didn't want to burn the building down, just wanted to get her attention, make her feel a fraction of the anger that consumed him. He knew she had seen him leaving, her cold eyes staring at him as their trucks passed each other on the road. But now that the act was done, his fear of what might happen next, well, he knew Wanita was capable of much worse. He stared into his glass. The gravity of his actions began to settle in. The initial satisfaction he felt was now overshadowed by a gnawing fear. Wanita's influence and power reached far beyond his, and he knew that she would stop at nothing to get revenge. He took another long drink, trying to steady his nerves. The tequila dulled the edges of his fear, but it just couldn't erase the reality of his situation. He had wanted to make Wanita feel his pain, but now he realized that he had only invited more suffering into his already broken, miserable life. Back at the hacienda, Wanita was moving through the house like a tornado, fueled by the excitement of coming up with the perfect revenge. The small fire Montoya had started was nothing compared to the inferno of ideas blazing in her mind. Wanita loved drama. She lived for it. Every betrayal, every slight was an opportunity for her to concoct a new scheme. And Montoya's reckless act had provided her with just the inspiration she needed. Oh, this is going to be fun, she thought as she paced back and forth from the kitchen to the veranda, rinsing out the rags she was using to clean the smoke-glazed tiles. She dreamed up a plan to make Montoya think he was going to lose his mind, to drive him to the brink of madness. The idea of using the legend of the Chupacabra was just irresistible. The myth of the blood-sucking creature had haunted the region for generations, and Wanita knew that invoking its terror would be the perfect way to unravel Montoya's fragile psyche. That evening, over a quick supper that Rosa had thrown together, she told Julian her plan. "We will make him believe the Chupacabra is stalking him," she explained with a maniacal edge to her voice. "We will visit him at night. He will hear its cries, see its shadow. He'll find signs, blood on his doorstep, claw marks on his windows. We will make him question his sanity." She imagined him drunk and stumbling through the streets babbling about the Chupacabra, his reputation further tarnished by what would appear to be a complete mental breakdown. Julian stared at Wanita. "You're really enjoying this, aren't you? Is there any reason a werewolf can't go after a guy?" "Why a Chupacabra?" he asked. "Well, because it's Mexico's version of a werewolf, sort of. Anyway, it's the thing parents tell their children. Be good or the Chupacabra will get you. Believe me, this is going to be fun," Wanita replied. In her mind, the game had just begun, and she was more than ready to play. Jack and Sasha drove up the road to the ridge that Grizzly had pointed out to them. It was obvious no one had been up this road in quite some time. Jack had to stop the truck several times to move fallen branches out of the road. The road was just full of pits and rocks. "Do you think he's pulling our legs?" Sasha asked. "Well, no telling. But we're not quite to the ridge yet, so I think we should just keep trying to get up this road and see if anything is up there," Jack replied. After another half hour of breaking through overgrown brush on the old logging road, they reached the ridge, and suddenly the dense forest on either side of the road opened up to reveal an open expanse of meadow, and there, at the far edge of the meadow, was an astonishingly large log home. Sasha gasped. "You've got to be kidding me," Jack muttered quietly, letting his eyes sweep over the majestic views beyond the house. He turned off the engine and looked over at Sasha. "Well, let's go see if the keys work." Grizzly had given them a key to the house on the ridge, but had failed to tell them just how grand a house they would be looking at. The house was constructed with massive logs and huge boulders in such a way that it seemed to grow out of the landscape. A large wooden deck ran across the entire front of the house and overlooked the winding expanse of the Yukon River Valley, miles and miles of forest, and the breathtaking mountain range beyond. They walked up the massive stone steps and opened the door. Tall windows framed the views, flooding the interior with light. And stepping inside, the great room was obviously the heart of the big house, dominated by a towering stone fireplace that stretched up to the vaulted ceiling. A river of stone led you from the front door through into the great room to the inside rooms. Exposed wooden beams crisscrossed above, which made the room even more impressive. The kitchen had a stone-topped counter that looked like a massive rock hauled from the nearby ridge. How did he do all this, Jack wondered aloud. And to think that he's living down there in that tiny little cabin when he has this unbelievably beautiful home up here, Sasha says. It's so sad, really. He and Jezebel would have had a beautiful life up here. Jack nodded in agreement. It's really unbelievable, all of it. The strange way his wife died, his hermit-like existence, his gold mines, and the fact that he wants to give this all to us. I don't know, Sasha. I'm still skeptical, Jack says. Well, stranger things have happened. Sasha laughed. Look at us. Life has strange twists and turns. That made Jack laugh. Let's take some pictures and then we'll drive back down and we'll talk to Grizz. Maybe we can make this work. Sasha smiled at that. Jack, this would be so wonderful for us. This place is huge. It's got enough bedrooms for everyone, and the kids could grow up here. And if it gets too snowy, we just go to Mexico for the winter. And they spent the next hour looking through all the rooms and marveling at how Grizzly had accomplished the building of this place in this remote of a location. The lower levels, which could most likely be called a basement, was full of tools that Grizzly had used in building this home, the materials he had gathered from the forest surrounding the property, but to think that he and Jezebel had accomplished all this without help was astonishing. Let's go, Jack called to the two Aussies who were busy chasing squirrels, exploring the surrounding meadow and forest. They came running and they jumped up into the truck. Well, when they arrived back at Grizzly's cabin, they were surprised to see Grizzly up and standing at the door, leaning on a crutch with one arm, a shotgun in the other. Hold up right there, he called out as the truck came to a stop in front of the cabin. Jack jumped out and yelled, Whoa there, Grizz, it's me, Jack. Who? Grizzly yelled. What the hell you doing on my land? Jack was taken aback. He wasn't sure what to say. Grizz, it's Jack and Sasha. You know us. I ask you what you think you're doing on my land, boy, Grizzly replied, hesitated, and then burst out laughing. Had you there, didn't I? Grizzly laughed. Come on in. Jack shook his head. You are one ornery son of a gun, aren't you? Oh, hell, what other excitement have I got in my life? Grizzly replied. I got a fresh pot of coffee on. Pour yourself and the missus a cup and let's talk about the homestead. Jack poured he and Sasha a cup and sat down at the table with Grizzly. I don't know what to say, Grizz. That place is incredible. It far exceeds what I thought I'd see. Yep, we poured our heart and soul into that place. I've only been there once since Jesse died, and that was just to lock it all up. Well, why aren't you living there when Jezebel was still alive? You said she died here in the cabin. Grizzly took a deep breath. It was a really rough winter. The road up to the big house was treacherous. There was no way to drive up there. We'd take our snowmobiles up, but Jessie wasn't feeling well. I think I told you that I had just found out she was pregnant. So we thought it was best to stay down here at the cabin where we knew we could get out if we had to. So that's why we were down here. You know that's one thing you need to consider living around here. The winters, they're rough. Some winters we get very little snow, but it's just so damn cold. Other times we get buried, and the only way in or out is by snowmobile or snowshoe. Well, Grizz, I have given your offer a great deal of consideration, and we'd really like to take you up on it, if you're still willing. But there's a lot of legalities concerned, and they're going to want to know if you're doing this under duress or if it's somehow being forced on you. You're going to need to come with me to Fairbanks to square it all up with the bank and the title company. Now, I don't want you to do this if you're not 100% certain. Thank you, Jack. I understand your concern. Like I said, I have a feller who comes here once a month and takes care of things for me. He'll be here in the next week or so, and we can have him handle all the legal ends. In the meantime, you two stay up there and get used to the place. I expect that road's in pretty bad shape. I got me a tractor out back you can use to make the road more passable. God, Grizzly, I don't know how to thank you, Jack says. Don't go getting sappy on me. I wouldn't be doing this if I had anyone to give it to, Grizzly grumbled. Sasha got up from her chair and walked over to Grizzly, leaned over and kissed him on the cheek. He started to say something sarcastic, but he stopped. He looked down at his folded hands on the table, and he says, "Now that right there makes it all worthwhile." Later that night, Julian had already drifted off to sleep, but Wanita was wide awake planning how and when to pull this charade off. She knew he would have his kids with him this second weekend of the month, and she also knew about the little house he rented to impress his family. She had gone to see him there a couple times when they were still dating. It would be the perfect setting, she decided. That large park was a perfect location for the sighting of a chupacabra. She visualized the entire scenario. He would be in the park with his kids just before dusk, a common enough occurrence, when they would spot the chupacabra just at the edge of the tree line. She pictured the little girls a screaming and their dad scooping them up and taking them back to the house. After dark, he'd settle his girls down in their bedrooms. They were 8 and they were 10. Then later, once he was passed out in bed with several drinks in him, the chupacabra would pay him a visit. She had orchestrated everything with precision, sure that the night would be unforgettable. Well, for Montoya, at least. Wanita felt a twinge of guilt for scaring the girls, but she justified it by thinking that no one would get hurt. Besides, all kids suffered nightmares. And if she was lucky, only Montoya would see the chupacabra in the house, and the children would sleep right through it. And with all the preparations in place, they waited until Friday night, when Montoya and the girls were playing in the park near the rented house, just as Wanita had planned. It took much coercing to get Julian to play along, but he finally consented and let her dress him up. He transformed into his wolf form, and she brought out the razor, the clippers, and the mousse. First she shaved all his beautiful wolf hair, leaving just a mohawk-looking ridge of fur. Then she slathered in the mousse and spiked it, just like the spikes on the back of a chupacabra. Julian felt humiliated and wondered what, if any, changes this might make to his human appearance once he had transformed back into a man. Would he still have his long silky hair? Once she was finished, Julian looked just like a real chupacabra. Well, maybe a little taller and definitely a little bulkier, but close enough to fool just about anyone. They got into Wanita's truck and drove to the park to make their appearance before dusk. And just as she thought, Montoya and his 2 daughters were at the park. The girls were entertaining themselves on the playground equipment, and Montoya was slumped over on a bench looking at his phone. Wanita and Julian waited while the other families left the park, leaving only the girls and Montoya as the evening light receded. "Okay, game's on," Wanita said as she got out of the truck, opened the door for Julian, who jumped out and ran for cover under a wide tree in the park. Looking around to make sure that no one else was watching, he began slinking towards the girls and the bench where Montoya sat. How close do I have to get for them to notice me, Julian wondered. He looked back over to the truck where Wanita was waiting. The things we do for love, he chuckled to himself, before letting out a chilling sound, somewhere between a howl and a cry. He wasn't exactly sure what a chupacabra was supposed to sound like, but he figured this was as good as anything to get their attention. Montoya did not look up from his phone, and the two girls kept laughing and chasing each other around the merry-go-round. He was close now, closer than he wanted to be. If the girls see me now and scream, well, I'll have to run, and that'll make it look like I'm afraid of them, he thought, as he attempted to make his chupacabra call again. Still, Montoya did not even glance his direction. The two girls had jumped off the merry-go-round and were climbing the slide. Julian was right near the swing set, and he was hesitant to get any closer. He didn't know if Montoya packed a pistol, and he didn't want to take any chances. Just then, one of the girls that had made it to the top of the slide looked down and saw Julian stalking towards the bottom of the slide. She let out a blood-curdling scream, which did get Montoya's attention, but he only looked up at the slide and didn't even notice the furry beast standing only feet away from the bottom. He abruptly went back to looking at his phone. And by now, the second girl had reached the top of the slide, and both were hovering at the top, staring down at the shaggy beast below. Julian snarled, showing his sharp teeth, hoping to get another scream out of the girls, but they both sat quietly looking down at him. Julian knew Wanita was watching all this from her truck and laughing her head off. Julian slinked away from the slide and towards Montoya. He was only a couple of feet away from the bench when he began growling and let out another of his chupacabra cries. Now this time Montoya glanced up, saw the fierce eyes and the snarling mouth. He let out a scream, dropped his phone, and ran to the back side of the bench as if putting protection between himself and the rabid beast. Julian snapped at him, and then he turned and he ran, leaving his daughters behind. Julian loped after him, not too fast, wondering if it was right to chase him and leave his daughters alone. Shouldn't he have run to his daughters? Julian glanced back towards the girls. They had exited the slide and were now back on the merry-go-round. Montoya ran to the house on the northern edge of the park and slammed the door. Julian turned and headed back towards the park with the girls. He assumed Montoya was probably getting a gun and would come back after him. He didn't want to scare the girls, so he kept his distance and he waited. Montoya did not return. It was getting dark now, and Julian wasn't about to leave the two girls alone in the park. So he lay down in the grass and kept an eye on them, wondering what he should do, and wishing Wanita would get out of the truck and come over to him. They can't stay out here all night, he thought to himself. And now that it was quite dark, he saw Wanita walking towards him. Well, that didn't go as planned, she said with a sarcastic tone to her voice. Go on to the truck. I left the door open for you. I'll tell the girls to go home. Julian sat in the truck watching as Wanita picked up the phone Montoya had dropped and walked the two girls home. While back in the truck, Wanita prepared for the second attempt at scaring Montoya. I can't believe that jerk just left his daughters at the park, she said. He really does deserve this. They parked near the house and waited for the lights to go out. It was obvious which rooms the girls were in. The curtains were open and the girls were jumping on the bed. They saw Montoya come in and turn out their light. The living room light remained on for another hour. Wanita petting Julian's head, she laughed. I'm sorry I'm putting you through all this. He's got to go to bed eventually, then he'll sneak inside and slip up into his room, wake him up, make sure he sees you. Julian, still in his chupacabra form, was able to hear everything Wanita said, but could only nod his head in response. There was one drawback to being a werewolf. You could think like a man, but only howl like a wolf.